Yeah, I've seen Lost. Like, I get it. That guy doesn't have it. He doesn't have it like that. Okay, we need to get started because they do have a hard out in 2 hours. I don't want this to go for 2 hours. Psych! But I know what the fuck we're like.
There's always a bigger fish.
Welcome to There's Always a Bigger Fish, the show that asks the questions you didn't think to ask. Today we're asking the question, is Rey really a Mary Sue? I'm joined by the Star Boys. Still makes me so happy. We got Darth, a Star Wars YouTuber. Darth, what's up?
Hello there.
And of course we have Rybold, a Star Wars YouTuber. Ry, give me your best hello there.
Hello there.
Oh, I don't know. I feel like what's happening is Rybold is drifting closer to Obi-Wan from the prequels, and Darth is like drifting closer to like the original of that. You know, the New Hope.
I don't think I got high enough on the E. It was more like hello there.
It's also been too long, so in my brain I was going, "Hello, Poppy," and I'm like, "That's not right. That's that's the wrong one."
Wrong, Francis.
Oh wait, that's Pirates of the Caribbean, right?
Yeah.
Hello, Poppy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Parlay.
Parlay. Hey,
We should talk about that at some time.
Yeah, hot take. That first film's really fucking good. Okay.
Yep.
The second one ties Star Wars with the most I've ever seen a film in theaters. I saw Revenge of the Sith 5 times. I saw Dead Man's Chest 5 times.
Oh, he's gone.
Don't at me. It was good.
Like a minute. You can't hit me with that. We just started. What are you?
We don't have time to go into this right now.
I wasn't
You've
expecting that to break you.
Why? It's why it's.
We're gonna have to do a show about Pirates of the Caribbean and sit down and unpack that.
Oh my
Because
word!
what the fuck? Are you talking about right now? It's like I'm like that just you. I don't know what you just took a gun to like a big portion of my brain cells and pulled the trigger.
We're like a minute in and completely off the rails here.
Immediately, which is good. Look, today, okay, let me see if we can get us back on track. It's not that good. Yeah. Okay, we're talking about. So, okay, the way this started is, I had been rewatching Andor recently, and Darth has finally finished Andor.
I'm getting there. Not finished, but I'm getting there.
Making progress.
Yes.
Making progress.
But we have peer pressured / bullied him into finally watching it because he calls himself a Star Wars critic and he hasn't seen the best Star Wars that there is. So kind of pressured him and needled him a little bit. And one of the things that Andor got me thinking about is one of the really foundational aspects of storytelling is action and consequence, right? So if a character does something, there has to be like an equal and opposite reaction. And usually that takes the form progressive complication. So this is like year one writing stuff, right? You get into your first year writing degree. This is the kind of stuff you talk about of like how to structure a story. So progressive complication needn't be necessarily negative, but it like does have to like progressively complicate the story. So, you know, the story grid in there, like endless quest to make everything into like a framework that you can just reuse and repeat, which I disagree with. But one of the things that Sean Coyne talks about a lot is the idea that progressive complication, you kind of like have two general ways of progressively complicating a story. You have irreconcilable goods. So you do an action and then you're presented with two equally or seemingly equally positive things that you can do, or best of bad choices, which is like you do a thing and then it results in like you have a bunch of options and they're all equally bad and you have to sort of pick, you know, the path of least evil, as it were. And it's got me thinking a lot with Andor because Andor has a very specific and pretty discrete opinion on like how this stuff should work in reality, right? Literally everything Andor does has a cost. Everything all of these characters do has a cost, whether it's like the ISB agents, whether it's like Andor himself, whether it's Bix and all of the side characters. Everything has like an equal and opposite reaction, whether that's good or bad. And it got me thinking about Rey because we were joking the other night about wouldn't it be funny to make a video essay with the title, you know, is Rey really a Mary Sue? And then have it be like not ostensibly like not about whether or not she's a Mary Sue, which got me thinking, like, is Rey a Mary Sue? So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. I did a bunch of research. I stayed up till like way too late on Friday night, making notes and doing research and stuff. So I want to start with, we're going to try and narrow our scope to The Force Awakens, but the idea of us narrowing our scope to anything is a laughable exercise. We'll do our best. I wanted to start with my Star Boys, which, my goodness me, what a fun sentence. Never gonna get old. Can you tell me what's, like, give me like the pitch on like Rey's deal? Like, what's very high level? Who is she? What's her kind of arc that we're tracing? And then I'm going to get into what is a Mary Sue, and then we can talk about some textual evidence. I've written up Rey's character sheet so we can work through her abilities, and then I also want to talk about her decisions and their cost, and then we can sort of see where the conversation takes us. But let's start with, like, yeah, what's Rey's deal? Who is she? For those who have either forgotten or who saw the Rise of Skywalker and just sort of have found that when they go back into their memory bank, there's a big like white noise haze over Rey Skywalker. Yeah, does someone want to, like, who's feeling confident in their ability to pitch? Okay, wow.
All right.
I volunteer Rey's tribute.
Yep.
Much like I said about Kylo, I do think about Rey on the movie level and on the trilogy level, but because we do actually have a time constraint today, I'm going to stick with our original target of confining our remarks to just The Force Awakens. And only really acknowledge the other movies in the sense of, like, this might be a question that can be resolved at a later time, much like we said with Kylo in The Force Awakens. So Rey in The Force Awakens is a very interesting character to me. She has, or here is a first point that I would submit to you for your consideration, is that she has possibly, or actually no, not possibly, I'm stating this definitively, that she has the best character introduction of any character, main or otherwise, in the Star Wars franchise. It is Luke's is very good, but I think hers is the best. It is a sort of a case study on how you introduce a character using show, don't tell, because I believe she only says one sentence in the whole 6 minutes of her character introduction. There are a lot of different things that happen there that get you to immediately care about this character while you're being introduced to him. This is a very important thing. David would probably agree with me on that. It was a very important thing that you, as the author, need to do. You need to get the audience to care about your character. This, if you go back to our 10-year dive into Solo, you'll remember that I said that when action kicked off, especially like in a plot-driven story, like when the action kicks off, you need your audience to care about your characters, or else they're not going to care what's happening to them. And that was the mistake that I felt that they made at the beginning of Solo, if you recall that from 4 or 5 years ago. But so Rey on the other hand, has a fantastic character introduction. If anybody wants to go into filmmaking, I would recommend that they watch those 6 minutes there, because it's the main one, or the main character introduction that I read about and studied, as far as, like, here's how you do it using show don't tell, and here are all the different techniques that you can use, and to all the little different triggers, like the pet the dog, that kind of thing, that you can use to tap into our primal instincts of wanting to care about somebody. And she has a very similar intro to Wally. Go watch it. It's extremely similar to Wally. Yes,
I don't know that Wally is.
Wally is also show don't tell, his introduction, and it's very similar to Rey's. But anyway, the main thing that you get coming out of the introduction is that she's alone, and that's not something that we as humans want for people. She's alone. We don't want her to be alone, and that leads into the want and need that she has in The Force Awakens, which is that she, or like, what is it? It's the want, the need, the lie, and the ghost, right? So she wants somebody to come back for her. She was abandoned there as a child. She wants her family to come back for her. The lie that she is telling herself at this stage of the story is that somebody is going to come back for her. The harsh reality might be that they left her there because they didn't care about her, and that's too difficult a concept to deal with. So she lies to herself and says they are coming back for me because they do love me and they do want me, etc. And that's why she is stuck on Jakku, and that is her status quo. What she needs to do is to move on from there, and that's where we get pushed into the main events of the story. So like that is her want and her need. The issue with that is that really doesn't have anything to do with the rest of her journey in The Force Awakens, which is that she really needs to accept the Force, like Luke. And that is something that we get into the midpoint of, or that's not really an objective for her until we get into the midpoint of the story, where we have this like weird switcheroo. I'm like, yeah, forget about that. You need to accept the Force. That's what you need in your life.
Yes, I rewatched it again last night. I watched The Force Awakens 2 nights in a row. I don't recommend it for your health. Something that you've just touched on, which I want to kind of punch into very quickly, is I've been thinking about this, which is like, what is the film calling her to do once she gets abducted? Okay, we should say as well, because we didn't actually set up the character. So she's a scrapper living alone on a desert planet, very reminiscent of Luke, except she's by herself. She is living in the husk of a big walker. It's very, very cool. By the way, like the visuals of Jakku, some of my favorite in Star Wars. Aside from the fact that I'm sick of desert planets, very, very cool. And she is both waiting for her parents to come back and sort of dreaming of adventure or longing for adventure. Right? She puts on the rebel fighter pilot helmet, and she sort of, while she's eating her dinner, and she sort of looks up at the spaceship, and as Rey says, through no dialogue whatsoever, we get this impression that she's longing to leave Jakku, but she can't because of this lie that she's telling herself. She falls in with the old crew that we're expecting, and comes into possession at the very end of Luke's sword, but in the interim learns that she has Force powers, has this reinforced by Kylo Ren, who's like, he tries to get into her mind. She's able to get back into his, and we suddenly go, oh, she's a Force guy. She Force controls some guards, and then at the end she picks up the lightsaber, and they have their sword fight. But one of the critical, I guess, things that Rise touched on, which is one of my biggest, like, you both will have heard me yell about this for years now, but is when you're thinking about constructing characters and putting them in spaces, one of the biggest challenges that you have in the hero's journey is your character is typically leaving the space they're in to go on a journey, and the challenge can be, how do you make that journey resonate with the challenges they were facing back in the old world? Like, how do you connect those things together? And The Force Awakens simply doesn't for Rey. It just doesn't. It does for Finn, because the main objective is the thing that he was a part of. But for Rey, like, there's just a big disconnect. And it's part of what makes some of, I suspect for some viewers, and this is where your mileage is going to vary, I think it's where some of the Force stuff can feel like it comes out of nowhere and is like a bit unearned, because it doesn't really have anything to do with the rest of her arc. It's not like, her actual need was to have faith that her parents would return, because that would be similar to needing to have faith in the Force or accept the Force. It's like the opposite. She has to disabuse herself of that faith that the faith/lie, and then take up this new spiritual belief. Like, they're sort of conflicting in that way, and it's part of why she becomes a challenging character to write moving forward, I feel. Darth, is there anything you want to add before we get into some definitional stuff with the Mary Sue, and then we can start yelling at each other about?
Then the fun can begin.
Well, I mean, Darth already said that thing about Pirates of the Caribbean, so the fun's over.
I don't know. It's probably not relevant to this discussion, but one thing I thought was interesting about Rye's description of her introduction was that, yes, it was so well done, but then you're also left with the burning question of not really understanding her. You have this sense of her isolation and how that may affect her, but she doesn't look sad in a way that you could define, except when she like looks at the old woman and she's like, oh crap, that might be the rest of my life. But aside from that like one scene, you don't see her like, you know, sit there crying or something where you would see what emotional state that she's actually in. And like the scene is great to set up the like scaffolding of her character, but you don't know what's inside it, and that's what the entire rest of the movie is like, where you understand like broadly what's going on, but you don't understand why she's doing these things. And I feel like that starts at the very beginning, where you don't understand her why from the very beginning, and it keeps going. Why is she taking the lightsaber? Why is she doing this? Why is she doing this?
That's
I would.
that's interesting because I was going to disagree.
I was also going to disagree, but I keep thinking about what you said last time, David. How you and I are a bit more artsy fartsy about this than Darth is. But
Understatement. Yep.
I was like, yeah, that's pretty accurate. What was I gonna say? It's her. No, I think it's different than, or the situation with the Y is different in Kylo in that her Y is a bit easier to understand. It's that the issue, which I think David touched on already, is that her why doesn't have anything to do with the story or the journey that she goes on. Her why is she, or it doesn't have a lot to do with what she.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to do with the main events. It's
It
kind
doesn't
of
have enough to do with it. Is the issue?
tertiary is the word that comes to mind, although I still don't think that's true. And that it's like she wants somebody to come back for her. That's one of the things that she wants, not necessarily what she needs. She needs to move on from Jakku, but one of the things that she wants is somebody to come back for her, and she gets that when Finn and Han show up to rescue her, and she gives them that big hug, is because somebody came back for her. That's a big deal to her.
I mean, that's a great tie into what I thought. Like when I was going back and trying to think of what is this character, just looking at this movie, and it felt like such an example of if you were writing a teenager who was going through the struggle of growing up and they didn't know who they were, they didn't know who they wanted to be, and they felt completely lost and alone. That's what this character feels like to me. And I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it's also like Kylo's going through the same thing and Finn's going through the same thing, and Finn and she are presented as both such like pure, they make the right decisions even though they have this terrible background, and that terrible background doesn't affect them negatively at all, and they have to go through this process of growing up and figuring out who they are and what they want to be. But how much sense does it actually make? Yes, you could infer a whole lot, which we definitely differ.
Well, the character that I like, that you want to, the character or characters that you want to compare her to are Luke and Anakin, the other main protagonists. And right away you have the difference between Luke and her is that Luke very definitively early on, in still within his character introduction, wants to be involved in the events of the story, whereas she repeatedly does not. Yet she is. She keeps being, I think I said she keeps being pushed through the story at different important locations. There's maybe one situation where she actively chooses to be involved, and that ties back to her. We understand her why, or rather her why is understandable, but her why doesn't necessarily motivate her to be involved. I think we're getting sidetracked a little bit here.
I want to circle back to a point that Darth made, which is about her interiority. So, I mean, the only reason I push back on that is, and this is because of the types of stories that I'm obsessed with and the types of stories that I make as well, which is a lot of her interiority comes with the way that she reacts to things that other characters react to as well. Like when she first encounters BB-8, she frees him, and then she's like, "No, leave me the fuck alone. Like, just like I'm not dealing with you. I'm not dealing with you," which is like not a good guy thing to do. And it speaks to that interiority of like she is so used to being alone that it's become like a defense mechanism of like, well, obviously I'm waiting for my parents, so I can't get caught up in any other shit. I have to be alone and wait for them to come back. That's what I'm doing here. And it's the thing that she needs, which is to go out and seek her found family, is in front of her, and she rejects that need in favor of her want, which is like how you develop like interiority for a character. I guess where I want to kind of put a pin in this and then move on to the Mary Sue part is Darth makes an interesting point, I think, for the way that most people will experience a character, which is like, why is she still on this adventure? And the line that she says in the film, she says it 2 or 3 times, is she feels a sense of obligation to the rebels to return the droid to the Resistance, and that's the line that she gives to Finn when he's talking about leaving. She's like, "Hey, we have to do this. This is our moral obligation." And moral obligation versus like desire or need is not as compelling of like she's doing something because of the consequences of not doing it instead of doing something because she's motivated to do it, if that makes sense. They can feel very different. They produce different outcomes.
One of the very interesting things about that scene is I would say as maybe a part or a stronger motivation than for her there, other than moral obligation, is that she initially rejects BB-8, like you said, and I felt that feels a little bit weird. The quick turnaround there. I think it might have been better if she had been overly eager to bring BB-8. Like, I understand like the whole defense mechanism, but she sort of folds pretty easily, and then they're best buds.
She does try and sell him for a minute.
No,
which is what ends up being her downfall.
She thinks about it, and it demonstrates a very strong bond with BB-8 by rejecting that because of the situation of scarcity that she's initially presented as being in. So I think it would have been better the other way around. But in that scene where she's trying to convince her, I think what exactly she says is like, "What about BB-8?" And because she cares about BB-8, she doesn't really care about the Resistance or anything else. She cares about BB-8. And right before then, what I thought was interesting is that everybody at that table doesn't want to be involved in this story just prior to this. Is that she wants to go back to Jakku, Han doesn't want to go see Leia, Finn wants to run as far away as possible, and Maz is not really interested in helping them. So it's like nobody there is interested in being involved in this story. I thought that was an interesting little detail. Where first of all, it's presented like that, and then a moment later she's like, "Well, what about BB-8?" It was like, "Well, you didn't want to be doing this a minute ago either. What are you yelling at me for?"
And that's before her turn. That's before she has the moment with Maz, and so at that point she still has the need to find her parents, but she forgets that, and her motivation changes. So it's like the internalization of the character just kind of gets screwy.
Well, I want to be very clear with nomenclature here. So her want changes, but her need remains the same, because she wants to go back and wait for her parents, and her want shifts when she touches the saber. Well, I mean, she obviously initially literally rejects the call to adventure. She physically runs away, which is the most J.J. Abrams thing of all time. But then the way in which she is reingratiated into the story is that she is kidnapped, and that is the end of the decision she makes. I've written down, which we'll talk about in a minute. I've written down the decision she makes in the film. The last choice she makes in this story is to run away from the sword. And then later at the very end, when she's in mortal jeopardy, she picks up the saber and fights Kylo Ren. But like literally her last choice in the story is, I'm going to run away from my destiny. And then the rest of the story happens to her, essentially. Obviously, she makes the incremental choices of like, I'm going to try and, mind trick Daniel Craig, Stormtrooper guy, like all that shit is happening. But fundamentally, the extensibility that she has to influence the story and her agency ends the second she gets kidnapped, to an extent, which is just like really an interesting choice, as Raya touched on, for a character who is part of a group of characters who don't want to be doing this in the first place. It feels like they sensed that in the script, and Kasdan or whoever on the writing team went, shit, well, if they don't want to get involved, what if we just force them to be involved? How do we do? Oh, we'll just kidnap her. Because that gives Finn motivation,
Well, that is one of the more interesting things that I think about, where you, and David, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the general idea of the hero's journey or a transformative journey for a hero is that roughly the first half of the story, they should be reactive, where events happen to them, and then they have to make a decision. And then somewhere around the midpoint, you have a shift where they start, quote unquote, pro-tagging, and then they are making decisions which cause events to happen. Where we go from reactive to proactive. That was a definition that was explained to me a long time ago, and I thought that was really good.
It's a good framework. Yeah.
Yeah. Events happen. They have to make they are forced to make a decision. That's being reactive, and then they make decisions, and then events happen. And with Luke in A New Hope, that happens when they get captured on the Death Star, and they're in the radio room or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, Princess Leia's here," and he's like, "We need to go do something about that." And Han's like, "Well, fuck that," but he's like, "Well, she's rich," and then so he's making a decision, and he's causing events to happen. And so that's his shift point from being reactive to active. Whereas Rey has the issue of she doesn't choose to leave Jakku. She is pushed off of Jakku. And then she doesn't want to go see Maz, but Han is the one who is literally driving the story by piloting the Millennium Falcon. And then she runs away from the saber, but I will disagree that that's her last choice, because the First Order shows up and she reacts.
She to save BB.
She does go. Well, BB-8's with her, but she does go running back and take some shots at the guys before running away again.
Well, but specifically, she's like, "I'll delay them. You go." Like she's buying BB-8 time to escape.
Yeah. So my question there is, when I was looking at that, I'm like, is that a reactive or a proactive decision? I would lean toward it's a reactive decision.
I mean, at a certain point, we can split semantics on it. I think it comes down to it doesn't feel proactive, like because the First Order had arrived.
There's an event and she's reacting to it essentially. Yeah. So
yeah.
But yeah, that you're right. That like aside from that, again, she's pushed through the rest of the story and doesn't really make any decisions of consequence. She's not doesn't really pro-tag in this movie,
which is fine. She doesn't have one of my biggest, and I think Darth, you probably talked about this before extensively in some of your essays. You'd have to put a gun to my head to be like which ones, but I very vividly recall you touching on some of this with a lot of the things you've talked about with Rey, which is, and particularly Finn as well, which is that like it feels like these two characters should be one character. Like they're sort of like if you put both of them together and like their place in the story, they would be a really compelling protagonist, but they're sort of split between these two characters that are very similar. Like there's no the way that I was describing this to a buddy of mine last night was there's no Princess Leia in the trio. There's two Luke Skywalkers and a Han Solo, and it just feels weird, like because they kind of have to split the forces of protagonism between the two Luke Skywalkers, and it just like doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't really like. Anyway, okay. I want to put a pin in that.
No. Just the last thing before you put a pin on that is that the end result of that is that we get to Rise of Skywalker and Finn suffers from useless character syndrome.
Mm-hmm. See, I would have killed him at the end of the second film, and that would have been the or maybe at the start of the third. I don't know. It depends on your mileage. It's unfortunate the way that the real life events transpired and who ended up dying in the films. Like obviously the extra textual influence over those scripts is poor timing, but I probably would have killed Finn at the same time as Leia, and then had that be the motivation to challenge Rey's character and really push her into that alternate reality of maybe not being a Jedi and going down the grey path. Like I think there are levers you can pull there where you realize that you do have like an extraneous character. There's a conversation I've been having about book 3 with my developmental editor, which is like, she was like, hey, you probably need to like kill this character or do something to take them out of the story, because it's you're keeping them there because they're fun to have in the story, but they have no place in this narrative. And I feel like that's definitely the issue with Finn, is they don't remove him early enough, or they don't change him significantly enough from Rey. Like he doesn't play the same part as Leia, right? Like he doesn't moralize and turn into like a super spy princess kung fu badass. Like he just like doesn't really have a place in that extra textual space that makes sense. And so when you've got this mythopoetic structure that Star Wars typically follows, obviously we've talked about this before, the sequel trilogy much more sci-fi. When you've got the mythopoetic structure of the buildings around the hero's journey, if you have two characters where you're trying to split that across, which is possible, you have to be really deliberate about like which levers each character is pulling. And this just I think Finn is just sort of emblematic of the larger, like Darth was saying before, like, you know, there's J.J. Abrams just like there wasn't really a plan here. If you're going to tell three stories, you can do that without a plan, you know, but you have to follow your own lead. And we've talked about this so much to death, so I don't want to labor on it here, but like the biggest mistake that the sequel trilogy makes is not picking up what Rian Johnson puts down, is not going, okay, let's see what we can do with what he's given us here and make a follow-up film. They went, okay, half of the people that saw that film didn't like it, and also Solo just bombed, so we need to course correct and make a sequel to The Force Awakens instead of make a sequel to the film that came before it. And you can see in some ways that like the absence of a plan is probably a compelling part of why it's a really shaky conclusion. But you can have no plan and still tell really good stories. You think about something like The Mentalist, where that has a really big arch plot that spools out across like 8 seasons. Same with like House MD or something like that, where you can tell that they're sort of making it up as they go and they kind of have an idea of where it's going, but they still stick the landing and make the process of getting there interesting. And I just think the lack of faith that the higher ups have in the sequel trilogy is ultimately what gets you to that ending. And it's not trusting that like people are going to stick around for an interesting story. It's trying to make the safest story for these characters possible. And that's why you end up with, like Darth was saying, these characters who just like never really do the wrong thing. Like they just seem sort of like cosmically incapable of making poor choices, which is like unfortunate. You know, the decision that Luke makes to save Leia is like arguably what gets Obi-Wan killed. Like there are costs to these decisions these characters are making, which is part of what I want to talk about today. I've got kind of we'll talk about Mary Sue's, and then I've got the decisions that Rey makes, and then we can talk about their potential cost and what we think about them, and whether we think she's pro-tagging or not during them. And then I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, where we think that puts her, you know, in context and conversation with that cultural phenomenon, which is the Mary Sue. So I wanted to start with some definitional stuff. Let's all go back to high school English, and let's start with the definition. So I wanted, before I ask this, do you guys know where the term came from? Because I have... Yeah. Okay. Rye does. I'm imagining Darth probably doesn't, because you're not a giant fucking English nerd like we are. Is that accurate?
Go ahead. Yes.
Okay.
I might, but I'm not positive. So go ahead, enlighten us.
All right. Well, so quick definition. Basically, Mary Sue as a concept is this idea of like a talented, attractive, charismatic protagonist, usually a female, usually a self-insert. I'm going to asterisk the usually on the female in a minute, and we'll talk about why that is. But the crucial thing is like, you know, they're like hyper competent, almost like inexplicably or unbelievably competent in a text. One thing to note is this is more of like a psychoanalytical response. It exists in postmodernism. It's not like a modernist concept. So your perceptions on whether or not a character is a Mary Sue are going to change based on your experience with the text. You know, meaning is made at the reaction, not creation. So to what extent you think Rey is a Mary Sue will vary on your perception of the character, and indeed your perception of, you know, frankly, like how much of a feminist you are is probably going to be like a big heuristic for like where you land on that spectrum. A few things to touch on, and I'll talk about where this came from because I think it's really important, and then I'm going to read you where it comes from because it's fucking awesome. But it's a big mistake I think that happens in modern conversations about the Mary Sue concept is missing like the point of its origin, which is it's the fantasy of the perfect woman who exists to serve the needs of men. And in doing so, minimizes all of these extra competent things about them, minimizes the the charisma and the beauty and the excellence and all these things, minimizes them to serve the needs of the men in the story. One of the problems is that, how do I say this? There is a particular portion of men online that exists in certain spaces that use this as a lever to describe any female character with any level of competence, which is which seems to me to be a reflection of their opinion of women writ large, and their opinion of femininity writ large, rather than anything to do with the story. So I want to put a pin in that concept, just because it's going to come up at some point. Someone's going to write a comment. Which
We're putting a lot of pins.
We have to. It's one of these conversations, because otherwise we'll be here for 5 hours, and I have a lunch thing. You know, in postmodern discourse, which is obviously modern now. Anyway, I guess like meta modern is where we're at now. But in postmodern discourse, this has been expanded in some media criticism spaces to cover any seemingly perfect character in the text, which I disagree with, only because I think the lever that they don't necessarily have to be like present as female, but they do. I think the key piece there is it's serving the needs of the men in the story. This is an idea that comes from examining the ways in which stories kind of like reflect and refract some of like the inbuilt heteronormativity of like the postmodern movement that it was trying to examine. Two things, and then I'll read you where this comes from. So this was originally a Star Trek thing. Which is why I was assuming Darth didn't know about it. Because obviously I was a Star Trek kid, and you were a Star Wars kid. The duality of man. The closest male equivalent, which I think a lot of the people agree with, is Wesley Crusher from Star Trek Next Gen, who is this like brilliant teen who always solves these fantastically complicated problems. He's like a science genius, a maths genius. He always makes the morally right choice. And he even gets promoted again and again on the Enterprise. He's basically like a son to Picard. But Wesley isn't specifically gendered. And what I mean by this is like he's not coded masculine. He's sort of still in that teen stage where he's presented as sort of quite ambiguous in I guess in his behaviors. And one of the consequences of that is he is like kind of this non-gendered character that exists to serve the need of Picard, despite what where we land on the spectrum of your mileage on his character. His literal purpose is to serve the Enterprise, which is captained by Picard, and so he kind of fits into the mold nicely. I want to read you it's very short, the original satirical short story where this came from, which was written by Paula Smith, and it's a Star Trek parody. And I'm going to try and do the voices, but we'll see how we go. It's been a while since I've watched Star Trek. Gee, golly gosh, Glorxy, thought Mary Sue as she stepped onto the bridge of the Enterprise. Here I am, the youngest lieutenant in the fleet, only 15 and a half years old. Captain Kirk came up to her. Oh, Lieutenant, I love you madly. Will you come to bed with me? Captain, I'm not that kind of girl. You're right, and I respect you for it. Here, take over the ship a minute while I go get some coffee for us. Mr. Spock came onto the bridge. What are you doing in the command seat, Lieutenant? The captain told me to. Flawlessly logical. I admire your mind. Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, and Mr. Scott beamed down with Lieutenant Mary Sue to Rigel. It's like 112. I'm not going to read the Roman numerals. They were attacked by green androids and thrown into prison. In a moment of weakness, Lieutenant Mary Sue revealed to Mr. Spock that she too was half Vulcan. Recovering quickly, she sprung the lock with her hairpin, and they all got away back to the ship. But back on board, Dr. McCoy and Lieutenant Mary Sue found that the men who had beamed down were seriously stricken by the jumping cold robbies. Mary Sue less so. While the four officers languished in sickbay, Lieutenant Mary Sue ran the ship and ran it so well she received the Nobel Peace Prize, the Vulcan Order of Gallantry, and the Trafalmordian Order of Good Guyhood. However, the disease finally got to her and she fell fatally ill. In the sick bay, she breathed her last. She was surrounded by Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, Dr. McCoy, and Mr. Scott, all weeping unashamedly at the loss of her beautiful youth and youthful beauty, intelligence, capability, and all-round niceness. Even to this day, her birthday is a national holiday on the Enterprise. It's such a good fuck. It's so good. And and on that, Paula Smith obviously talks about it's a critique of the way that so at the time there's a bunch of sci-fi magazines that were publishing Star Trek fan fiction short stories. And what Paula Smith was noticing as she was working in some of these editorial spaces is a lot of teenagers were submitting stories like this, where it was them sort of self-inserting themselves into the story as these like brilliant young women that were like there to make the crew the happiest possible and things like that. And the idea of the character is like these are character archetypes that kind of limit what's possible in the textual space. They are fully formed characters without flaws, which means they have nothing to gain and nothing to lose. It's one of the complaints that I've leveled at the Obi-Wan TV show, which is that both Obi-Wan and Leia show up as fully formed characters that we're going to meet again in a... I was going to say a Force Hope, a New Hope. They show up fully formed in that Obi-Wan show. And indeed, in Solo, that was one of my complaints as well, which is that Han Solo just shows up fully formed as that character. And so there's no growth, there's nowhere for him to go. So that's kind of definitionally what we're talking about when we talk about Mary Sue. As I said, that has like, as these things do, it has evolved and changed in different spaces. But for our purposes, we're going to try and like use that traditional lens of, is the female character who really like is just perfect, funny, good at everything, and things like that. So I want to start with Rey's character sheet, and I might get some of this wrong, I might not. I need you Star Boys to correct me. I've written them down as best I could, having watched the film twice in 48 hours. Again, do not recommend it. By the way, I think it's a perfectly fine film. It's fine. Like, I had a really good time with it the first time, and then the second time I was like, oh yeah, there are some ideas in here which really hold up to scrutiny. Although I could do without Maz Kanata, I want to put my head through a fucking wall anytime she's on screen. I hate that design.
It's it might be the most watchable of the sequel trilogies.
That's definitely true. The bar is pretty low for that though.
I have seen The Force Awakens and I have seen The Last Jedi a lot. They're both to me watchable, although because there's a lot more action going on in The Force Awakens, that one is a bit more enjoyable to me. Tross I've only been able to sit through in its entirety one time.
Okay, interesting.
I have examined the scenes on a scene level a number of times, but actually sitting down to watch it, I can't do it.
Yeah, I think that's a very Star Wars person. I think a lot of Star Wars fans are just like that, which is like heartbreaking because it's it's all Star Wars, baby. Okay, character sheet time. So I've just written down her abilities and then my guess at the explanation. I'm keen to get your guys' explanations or thoughts as well.
And this is limited to The Force Awakens, right?
Limited to The Force Awakens.
Okay.
So the first thing we observe is that she is a really good mechanic, or at least like understands mechanics enough to be a scrapper and to sort of go into the ship and find the valuable components. And my thinking here is like she's literally scrapping for a living. It would make sense that she has learned about the ships or has been taught by somebody how to do this. She is there with other scrappers. It is completely feasible that like she learned it from them, mentored from them. You start from the bottom, Drake style. Now we're here. All that good stuff. Completely feasible to me that she would be like good with mechanical stuff. She's like she's like Don Draper, right? Like, working on the banged up car that your dad, left behind makes you a good mechanic, which explains later in life how you're able to fix cars and understand cars. Makes sense. Yes, no objections. I feel like that's a pretty safe one, right?
That was my explanation, or at least when I was arguing with people back in the day, I said that it would be in her interest to learn either how things operated or rather what parts were valuable, and because of her profession as a scrapper. However, the argument that I made at that time was that would it not be more valuable to be working as a mechanic rather than a scrapper? I don't know. It's a question.
Yes, it's a question. Whether that's possible or not is the other question, right? Like, I think you get the sense that there is an air of, you said scarcity, and there's an oppression that comes from scarcity. There is an inability to it is difficult to be aspirational when all of your free time is invested in getting the next paycheck to get the next meal. It's one of the reasons why like it's so hard to move from paycheck to paycheck into the ability to save and generate, you know, wealth and income, is because you need time, and like all of her time for the most part presumably is divested into going and getting scrap for the next paycheck.
Yeah, which is why I said that because of the situation of scarcity that she's presented, or that I didn't say, I don't remember if I ever said it to you, but like, because she's presented as being in a situation of scarcity, it would not make sense for her to devote any time to something that is not going to immediately be of maximum benefit to her. As in,
I think you said that in Solo, actually.
I might have said that in Solo too. But like
Yeah.
the first time it occurred to me was with Rey, because it's like, why does she learn Wookiee or Ewok or anything else that is not going to be of like immediate benefit?
Oh, okay.
To...
That's next on my list. So that might be a good segue.
All right, go ahead.
Knows both Wookiee and binary.
Binary, I have less of an issue with.
Binary makes sense.
And one more. There's the
local language.
Vulcan language?
The local language. Whatever language they're speaking.
Oh.
Yeah.
So she's speaking basic.
Yeah, that's what she shouts at the dude who's got BB-8 tied up.
Yeah,
so she's
Talama Parquat, whatever that means.
Yeah. So she
Imagine
knows.
that was like real rude.
Huh?
Imagine if that was like a real like rude insult. You fucking piece of shit.
Whoa,
the
Ray,
fucking
this is a
droid
kid's
alone, you
movie.
can't.
Just turn on Google
you
Translate and see what it says.
You can swear in different languages. That's what they did in Firefly. They just did all the cursing in Chinese, which has issues in retrospect, but nice idea. Sorry, you were going to say something about... So I said the third one, the local language, that makes sense. Binary, okay, talk to me about binary, because I don't... Star Wars... I'm not sure I'm a noob anymore. I'm an intermediate Star Wars person now. I don't really, understand... why binary exists and how it functions, because some droids can just fully talk. What's going on, guys?
I don't know that there's a solid reason, do you?
Of why some people can speak binary and some can't?
No, there's no reason for binary
binary
to exist.
Yeah.
No, it does. I mean, we have Alexa. It doesn't make sense that I think it's just a cute sort of thing that R2 does.
It is cute. And BB-8
sort of,
is the cutest droid that they've ever done. He's
You
bleeping
could-
and blooping, and he's...
I mean, you could maybe argue that those droids were meant to be space pilots that didn't need a vocalizer because they're always operating out in space, and the human would read the screen to know what the droid was saying, so they didn't need to have that built into them. But then there's so many other BB-8. I don't know. There's so many other instances where it doesn't make sense.
That makes sense. That makes sense to me conceptually, at a world-building level. But it runs into that issue of but then Anakin and Obi-Wan talk to their fucking droids like they're responding to the binary, the bleeps and bloops. So it's there's some disconnect there. But all to say, I guess why would it make sense for her to speak binary is my question now.
I would say I would find it to be, this is a galaxy full of droids. It would make it's well, I would say as far as credibility goes, when it happens for her, it is right at the end of her introduction. And this is very in terms of where you put this kind of oh, you have this skill in a story. It's not really that important that she can speak, that she can communicate with BB-8. I mean, it's not critically important that she can communicate with BB-8, life or death situation. But it's also right at the beginning of her, at the end of her character introduction, and that's where you stick all that stuff in a story. You put it right at the beginning because we are meeting the character in the status quo, and she's a scrapper, and she can fight with a staff, and she can speak the local language as well as basic, as well as binary, and etc. And so this is where she's starting from, and and that's where you can put all that stuff. So as far as plausibility of that, I'm less concerned. I mean, it's plausible enough in the Star Wars galaxy. Some people can speak binary, some can't. Finn can't, for example. But
By the way, that I still think the running gag of literally everyone except Rey not believing Finn for a second is still to me very funny. It even like watching it last night, I was having I was genuinely having a thrilling time. Like there's a look that Han Solo gives him when she's like, he's with the Resistance, and Han just gives him this look, which is like, fucking, she bought that? Wow. Like it, and then he's like, let me tell you something, pal. You know, women always find out the truth or something, which is a very Han Solo thing to say. But it's both funny and it also places Rey in conversation with Luke Skywalker, right? I think we should say too, it's undeniable that this conversation is in conversation with Luke Skywalker. She has on a similar outfit. She lives on a desert planet. She picks up his laser sword, right? Like, this is a character in conversation with the ideas and the thoughts about Luke Skywalker. I don't know who said it, one of you two at some point, that this is a rehash of the first Star Wars film, and so it's naturally in conversation with that. And one of the consequences of that is this is how I'm thinking structurally anyway. Is I would also be transposing certain qualities that Luke has onto her if I'm in conversation with those original stories. So, desert planet, can speak to droids, is good mechanic, or we'll talk about the pilot thing in a second. But like those are some of the things that Luke has. He's also a really good shot as well, was the other thing that we learned about Luke. We see that with Rey when she gets the gun. She seems surprised by it. Different conversation. But yeah, there's I forget why I started that tangent. I think we were talking about binary, but to me it also makes sense. In the imaginary of this universe, like you said, there's a lot of fucking droids. You're gonna have to like learn to interact with them. And something that's interesting in Star Wars is a lot of characters, like everyone seems to understand whatever English is, whatever that baseline language is. Everyone seems to at least understand that, but then often will respond in their own language. It's quite an interesting thing they do, where like Finn can talk to BB-8, but BB-8 always bleeps and bloops back. You can talk to Chewie in galactic English, but he will do the Skywalker or whatever the fuck it's called back at you. That's just like an interesting imaginary that Lucas has, which I think comes from that Flash Gordon era, where one character, all the main guys talk English and all the aliens sometimes talk alien, but they seem to understand each other.
Yeah, you can see it in like it's kind of sometimes I think it's just like a sort of a cool thing where, because like in in Ocean's 11 they have the Chinese guy, and he only speaks Chinese, or he only speaks verbally Chinese, but they talk back to him in English, and there is this sort of like he only verbalizes in Chinese and they only verbalize in English, but they both understand each other.
They both understand each other, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just I don't know, it's just sort of like it's a too cool for school kind of thing,
Yes, it's very stylish.
There, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, okay.
This gin and this buried by this lemon thing I got here is not that bad.
You smothered it, have you?
Yes.
There's something interesting about the three things that we've mentioned so far, which could all have been made better by something that David had said earlier, which was focusing more on the mechanic than the scavenger thing. Because something else that I keep thinking about is the fact that there was no way off the planet that we're aware of. Like, she had to go get into a ship that she wasn't even sure could fly in order to leave. If she was a mechanic who was working on ships that were always leaving the planet, taking the scrap somewhere else, then she would always have this temptation and the ability to get on any of those ships and leave. This would also be a really solid reason for her to know binary, because she is having to talk with the droids who are also helping to fix these ships. And that would also possibly give her more chance to interact with other species. If they needed her to know Wookiee or whatever, we could see her interacting with other people because she's around them. She's not as isolated, but it's a little bit different of a setup for her character. And then this would also fix one of the Mary Sue issues that people have with her fixing the Millennium Falcon, because she instantly knows that there is a compressor that Unkar Pluck installed on the Falcon We don't know why she knows it, but she knows it, and she knows exactly where it is, and knows exactly how to disable it. So why did the scavenger know all that? There's not a good reason, thus it falls into the Mary Sue category, but if she's a mechanic who always works on ships in this fashion, she would know how to fix the ship. Maybe it's not the compressor thing, you could change it to something else. It's just like, oh, the hyperdrive is broken. Just like it was always broken back in the original trilogy, and she's like, oh, I'm a mechanic, I can fix that. So her whole character arc could have been made better with a slightly different introduction, and it makes the language thing make sense, it makes the mechanic thing make sense, just by changing what you had said.
It's funny you say that, because it's a show that does that exact maneuver, and it's called Andor. All of the main characters are both scrappers and mechanics that do it for a living, and it gives them all of these like feasible explanations for the abilities that they have. All I'm saying about Andor is every criticism anyone has of the sequel trilogy, it's like they looked at that and they went, oh yeah, we can do that in our sleep, let's just fix them, let's do a story that fixes them. And it connects, like you're saying, if they'd made that choice and Rey was a mechanic, it would help bridle her wants and needs to the story, right? Like you could think about ways in which maybe she's been like secretly fixing the Falcon for like the last few months behind the back of the dude that owns it, and maybe her secret desire is to take it and escape, but she's resisting. That's how she knows it's there, and she says, hey, we should take that ship. Finn says, how do you know that it flies? And she says, because I fixed it. Like it would pair her backstory closer to the motivations and the abilities that the story is interested in, without it feeling like maybe my issue with that is it might feel a bit clicky for it to be the Falcon, because this film in particular, every now and then it's like, here's a Star Wars thing, and I'm like, I don't give a shit. Like the Finn bumps the chest holo table, and I roll my eyes every time that happens. I'm like, you don't need to do that. We're already on the fucking Falcon, guys.
My fix for that was that she doesn't live in the AT-AT, that she lives in the Falcon, but we don't know, it's shot in such a way that we don't know it's the Falcon until they have to escape.
You can bury it in the sand or something, like.
Well, no, because it still has to fly, but like it's just it's Unker Plutt's ship, it's not going anywhere. She's not physically stuck on Jakku. She could leave at any time. She is mentally stuck there. She has mentally and emotionally. This is the thing that she needs to move on from. She's stuck there because of her lie. She is. So it doesn't matter that she can fly or she's a mechanic or she has ways off of the planet. She's fully capable to do that. She has trapped herself there, and this is my first big point about her not being Mary Sue, is that factor right there. But one other thing that I will say, since we're going through her character sheet, and I think this is good. I was going to say it later, but I think it might as well go into it now, is that, David, if my understanding of how the best way to create a strong, believable, plausible character that is not Mary Sue-ish, is that hypercompetency is okay if it is confined to one thing, or if they are hypercompetent but there is a downside.
That is accurate. Cost is the easiest way to, like, you're really good at X, but when you do X, it can create Y, which is bad for you, or bad for an outcome. Yeah.
So, like, Luke in A New Hope is a very, very good pilot. End. That's his hypercompetency. Where we are already talking about we're like, never mind the language. I'll leave the language thing aside because I don't think that's really that relevant. But like, she's already like, it's kind of related, but she's like a really good scrapper and she's a really good mechanic, and we're about to learn she's a really good something else in just a second.
Yes. Here's the thing, right? She is good at this stuff. What becomes unclear is the things she does that have like negative consequences for her don't really relate to her skills. Like the fact that she chooses or decides to help BB-8, like that doesn't really relate to anything she's specifically good at. It just the cost of that is like the boss of the Junkers, sets his thugs on her, which cascades into the events of them having to leave Jakku. But like she doesn't. That's not her exerting her will on the world and using this skill. That's her like just making a choice and having a consequence. And part of what I think is difficult here to navigate is there are subtle ways you can do this that don't involve like your character doesn't have to do something to get someone killed, right? Like it doesn't have to be the hey, we should save Leia, which ultimately Ben sacrifices himself for them to get away. It doesn't have to be that dramatic. They can be smaller choices, like the fact that maybe the fact that she speaks Wookiee, that could have had a negative consequence on Jakku. I think in your video, Ryan, you talk about like you could just sort of throw away scene where she's interacting with a Wookiee in a montage or something. You could tag that up a little bit and punch it up a little bit, and maybe have her choose to engage with a Wookiee that breaks slightly bad, and she has to that complicates some transaction she's doing, or means she gets paid less scrap. Like there are levers that you can pull that would show yes she's good at this, but one of the things we talk about in structural editing, so scene work, is characters should do extraordinary things and they should have extraordinary consequences. The fact that she's an excellent pilot and knows ships should have a downside. Now, granted, it does. Okay, she does. She flips the fuses on the Falcon to try and trap they're hemmed in by the two crews, by the two people that Han Solo has ripped off. And she flips the fuses to try and close off the bulkhead doors, and flips the wrong fuse and releases the big goopy goblin space creatures. So like she does make mistakes when she tries to use this skill, but then it doesn't really have any lasting consequence, which is also fine. But I think that's
plus that was the right decision though. Like the story, like that's how they escaped, was that she did the right thing accidentally, which saved them from the pirates.
Which is Mary Sue-ish. Now, yeah. That's a very important thing that you're bringing up here, because the original script does not have it play out that way. And I thought I was really curious about that, because in the original script, it's less Mary Sue-ish and it's less Mary Sue-ish, because like what happens is they like if you go back and watch that scene, which you have allegedly twice now in the past couple of days, is you recall that like they go down underneath. They're not on the Falcon. They're on Han's freighter ship.
They're on his big frigate. Yeah.
Yeah. So they go under the catwalk, and then they crawl to the other side of the thing, directly underneath the bad guys. Why did they do that? Doesn't really make a lot of sense that they do that.
They were hiding and trying to see who it was for some reason. I don't know why that was going to
see them.
Yeah.
So in the original script, they go down there. Like, I think they might say something in the actual movie about explosives, but in the original script, they get loaded up. Like Han's like, here's a bunch of shit, and they go down there with explosives to put underneath the bad guys, and they pass the panels, and Rey's like, that's not going to work. And they go back to the panels, and she's like, I need to unplug this thing, and that will release the monsters. And that's how we get out of this situation. She does it deliberately in that situation and not accidentally.
That would have been better.
So much better, because then she fucks up. Like, that's the... Oh, it's annoying, because it's this close. It's this close, because Darth is kind of right. I'm getting animated, because this shits me to tears. Darth is sort of right. She makes a mistake that is the right choice, sort of. They still have to struggle against...
She fails up, though.
She fails upwards. And then, they obviously deal with these big goopy goblin monsters and they escape, which is fine. But the failure, doesn't have a negative consequence. It doesn't progressively complicate the story. It becomes part of the resolution for the initial problem in the first place. What this should have done is, if she failed in this moment, it should have made it harder to escape. It should have made things worse somehow. it's such basic shit of like the decisions a character makes in a scene have to progressively complicate the scene that they're in or the larger arch plot that's occurring. Like, otherwise it just feels like they kind of skate by with plot armor, which is what this feels like to me. This feels like, oh, I fucked up, but it's fine, things will work out.
Yeah.
You know, granted, she goes and she does the door control to save Finn and what have you, but that doesn't feel like it generates enough friction from this mistake. Instead, the mistake obviously ends up going in their favor, which I actually don't have an issue with as like a concept. But the execution just it feels like the scene kind of resolves itself. It's a big problem in Chris Chibnall's run of Doctor Who, actually. Despite what Reddit might tell you, the issue with those stories is not that they cast a female in that role. It's that all of the stories, yeah, and Chibnall's tendency in those stories for some reason is characters participate in these stories and the stories sort of resolve themselves around the characters. It's a very 70s 80s kind of early postmodern instinct, which is that like evil defeats itself. There's a classic scene, it's one of my all-time favorite scenes in that show, which demonstrates to me like why it doesn't work, which is they're in the middle of this big investigation. It's a huge sprawling story where there are giant spiders turning up everywhere in London, and they get to the source of it and they find like the queen I don't know how spiders work, but in this imaginary it's a queen spider that's making all the spiders. And the Doctor's like, we can't kill it, it's a life. And the character's like, well, there's a Trump stand-in who's like, well, we should shoot it because like it's killing these people. She's like, we can't kill it. And the way that the story resolves is like he shoots it once, the Doctor, like, the gun gets taken away, and then it just like dies of like seemingly old age. Like the bullet doesn't seem to kill it, it just like the problem solves itself. And so much of those stories happen like that, and this scene feels lifted from that kind of imaginary, which is
bad,
is interesting. Like it's bad, but like it's one of those threads that you can kind of pull on and be like, what is this instinct here? And my intuition is these kinds of decisions are made because they're using the word safe, but it is what I mean. It's that quote that we referenced from Solo, right? Which is like this intuition of Disney and the kind of Star Wars vehicle with some of these stories, which is that you want to like insulate these characters against doing things that people might not like or that might make them unlikable. I think a lot of people's issue, and I'm not talking about Star Wars fans, I mean people writ large. Star Wars fans obviously have different issues with it, but one of the biggest challenges of The Last Jedi is it makes characters people like unlikable, which to me is like good. That's like, you should put your characters in mortal and ethical jeopardy and see how they react. And like it is a very modern approach to structure, and then it takes like a postmodern approach to the characters, I guess. But this moment is so emblematic of like no one does the wrong thing because there is no wrong thing, because there can't be. Like they cannot make the wrong decisions. And then it's so funny to me that like The Last Jedi opens with Poe actively making the wrong choice, and it's like, oh, this is a completely different type of story. Your mileage in that's going to completely vary, but I think for a character like Rey, she's already got all these amazing skill sets. Because she's the Luke Skywalker, she has all the Luke stuff, but it's all fully formed, right? And that's maybe the issue, is she could speak binary, no dramas. She could be kind of a good mechanic that learns to be a better mechanic, kind of a good pilot that learns to be a better pilot. But that sequence where she first pilots the Falcon is some of the craziest flying we've ever seen. Supplanted only by Poe Dameron later during the battle, where he does just the most like 360 no scope trick shot YouTube montage shit I've ever seen. Like, it is fucking sick, but like it is unbelievably good flying. And I think that's where it really does create friction with the suspension of disbelief, is like these amazing things aren't creating negative consequences. If that incredible flying where they go through that sequence, if she had damaged something on the Falcon, I know the gun gets damaged, but if that maneuver had like done irreversible damage to the Falcon, which is what causes them to get picked up by the freighter or something. Now we're talking progressive complication. But they just sort of like escape the planet and get picked up. And they're not related. Like the moments of competence aren't related to the friction of the narrative. And that's where the disconnect begins to happen between her character background, her wants and her needs, and the plot that's kind of occurring. Where if those things aren't in conversation, then it feels like you have someone cosplaying as Luke Skywalker without any of the negative consequences being press ganged into this story, right? Being kind of like forcibly inserted. And that's why it feels like that Mary Sue thing of the kind of fan fiction insert, right? That's that original idea is these characters who are hyper competent. They exist in service of the kind of patriarchal masculine structures they're in, particularly like in Star Trek where it's all militaristic. And here too, we see with the rebellion or the resistance. We see with the resistance, it too is a military organization. There is something about this scene to me that is like, it kind of telescopes out to the larger issue really, really tidily for me. Because then off the back of that, they get onto the Falcon. And yeah, as you said, whatever the gimmick is, she's like, I bypassed the regulator or the emitter or whatever the MacGuffin
Compressor.
thing is. Compressor. And Han Solo just kind of like looks at her like he can't believe it. It would be better if he was like, "You're a fucking idiot. We need that," and then something goes wrong. Like he'd be like, "Do you not think there's a reason he installed that?" Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and that's way more interesting. But instead we just get sort of Rey's pretty much good at everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what else is interesting
Sorry,
is you were just talking about the competence of the characters, how it doesn't really relate to the story, but in that scene where they're flying the Falcon, the competence of the two of them is actually switched. So he's the trained military person who theoretically should be good on the guns because he's been trained to be a gunner, which we saw before where he was actively blowing up other TIE fighters and stuff. But this one, I think there were only like 2 TIEs chasing them. And granted, eventually his gun got broken, but he still wasn't able to blow up the 2 of them that were chasing them when before he blew up other ones chasing them. And all of a sudden she's a good pilot out of nowhere and he is no longer a good soldier. So they like swapped him. It would have made more sense if there were like 6 TIEs chasing them. He is actively defending them because he's the trained soldier. He's able to blow them out of the sky, and she's just like running into stuff because she's not a good pilot because she hasn't done this before. That would have made way more sense.
So
Then you could earn your moment of like that trusting the Force moment of doing a sick maneuver would feel earned because there was something to overcome.
And what I always wanted to have happen there was that it was not the Force at this stage that let her do the awesome flying, but her knowledge of these ships. So she's her whole life, 20 whatever years, she's been working inside this Death Star, so she knows it blindfolded. So she is able to fly around inside this ship and evade the other TIE fighters who don't know every single nook and cranny of this ship. And that could have been why she was able to escape, not because she's a great pilot, but because of her experience that is logically shown through the introduction.
yeah, that's what I wanted to see too. That she shouldn't have been driving a speeder. She should have been flying. I think I said that in the video. That she rusted out X-wing or like the A-wing or something like that, where she's zipping around the inside of these things, so that when she sees the Star Destroyer, we can go, oh, she did that thing before. She's gonna do it again. Only now it's in the Millennium Falcon, and it would be completely believable. We'd be like, oh. We've already seen her do this. So it's immediate credibility. Not immediate, but like she's already established the credibility of her doing this. But one thing that I was going to say that back when you were talking about the discussion of Mary Sue is, I think if you recall in one of my videos I said I didn't like the term, and that's because every video discussing is Rey a Mary Sue has to begin with a definition of the term, because it is so ill-defined what a Mary Sue is. So this is going towards where we're probably going to conclude, or not where we're probably going to conclude, but in the area where we're going to conclude, is that I don't really generally like to think of is character X, or rather character XX, a Mary Sue or not, I like to think about it like, where do they land on the Sue scale? Are they more of a Mary Sue or less of a Mary Sue? So and if you that way you can look at a particular moment or feature or aspect of a character and go, is this more of a Mary Sue thing or less of a Mary Sue thing? And in many of the points that we've just discussed already, I would lean toward like if we have a little sort of thing of less or more of a Mary Sue, I think she lands higher on that scale.
Mm-hmm. You've Rise correctly anticipated the maneuver I keep doing, which is really like clickbait concept and then accidentally trick you into like thinking about media in the kind of meta modern way that we do. Yeah, look, to me
It's that artsy fartsy thinking.
It's that artsy fartsy shit. Yeah, it's verbs not nouns is what Rise alluded to. One of the things that we often talk about at Zero Indent is we're interested in the verbs of storytelling. We're not interested in nouns. We couldn't care less about labeling. It's about process and understanding, and it's about feelings and emotional reactions and academic framework around that. One thing about the Mary Sue idea that's interesting to me in this context is it gets, I kind of alluded to it before, but I'll put a finer point on it, which is I think it gets levied in conversations about this character because she's occupying the Luke Skywalker role and she's a female. It makes Mary Sue an easier conversation because Mary Sue was originally predicated on the concept of it being a female character. But the whole point that Paula Smith was making is that, like, this is the type of female character you shouldn't write. And then you have this problem, which is, like, because the noun exists, some people use that noun and they say, look, Star Wars, the SJWs have gone too far. They've gone woke. And it's like, no, it's fucking anti-feminist to have a fucking Mary Sue. That's the whole goddamn point. And so it is reactionary is what it is. This reactionary imaginary that they've sat down and they've gone, the way that we get the left to like our film is we write a bad female What are you fucking talking about? It comes down to this, I think, which is, like anything, when we use the term to examine her character in this context, we are using it as a tool and a framing device to get at some underlying things that are happening in this story and to try and, like, scratch around at the interiority and the kind of the mechanics of the story and the meaning it creates. And one thing that I will not have that I just do not tolerate is this notion that, Disney, Star Wars, or modern media in general, there is this implication that to have what some would call like progressive ideas, progressive casting, things like that, that those are inherently related to the merit and the quality of the writing and the storytelling. Yes, having more diversity in a story does tend to make it better. Yes, having more interesting faces, voices, ideas, worldviews tends, in my opinion, to produce better and more interesting and more engaging stories. The fact that Rey is a very competent female character has nothing to do with the fact that for some people, the fact that she's a female character and a protagonist in a Star Wars film is their underlying issue. If you gender swap Rey to being a male, we could have the exact same conversation we've been having. None of the things we have talked about so far have been about the way that she is gendered, because they don't gender her as a female in this story. The closest we get is that Finn is kind of smitten with her, but we could gender bend her into a man, and that would still work in the context of this story. Nothing about her characterization is specifically gendered. And so this notion that Disney made her a female to win fucking woke points, and they cast the actor who plays Finn to get woke points, is just like it's not mental gymnastics exactly, but it's flattening what's occurring in the story to fit an existing reactionary frame of reference, right? It's flattening the decisions that these people are making. It's flattening the casting that these people are doing. It's also, like, frankly, like, flattening what's happening in the story as well. We talked about it a lot in Sherlock, which is this tendency to need everything to be explainable, right? Everything has to be explicable. Rey is either a Mary Sue or she isn't. The world must be converted into binary because reality is really big and complicated, and the numbers are really big and complicated, and like the numbers that we live in every day don't reflect this, but like, you know, we deal in ones and twos and hundreds with our paychecks. We deal in 60s when it comes to like minutes. We don't think about probability and possibility in the way that it actually occurs, which is like 1 in a million things happen every single day, like every single second. That's just like the nature of the randomness of reality. And so I think there's an impulse when it comes to reactionary media criticism, which is obviously not the kind of stuff we do. There's an impulse to want things to be flattened into those nouns and put into categories, and to categorize, because it makes it easy to not examine things closely, and it makes it easy to retain your existing presumptions and worldviews and things like that. This mode of media criticism means that we run the risk, and you can go and watch old content, you run the risk of creating stuff that 6-7 years later you'll look back on and you'll say, I disagree with myself. There are video essays on the antagonist. There's one about Doctor Who that I now fundamentally disagree with, but that's the process. Is you open yourself up, you hold opinions, and you believe in them strongly, and you hold them loosely. You believe strongly and you hold loosely. You are prepared to learn and change and be incorrect. And I don't think that, in the typical way that Paula Smith imagined it, I don't think that Rey is a Mary Sue. We'll talk about the sword fighting in a second, and the fighting, because I think that's like the final point. I don't think she's a Mary Sue. I think like she is a female character in a story that is doing this to all of its characters. I don't think this is exception. I don't think that she's necessarily an exception to the other characters. I think because she is a female, that term gets levied because it's in conversation with, postmodern feminism and the reaction to the 70s and 80s kind of imaginary of females in media, and that final realization that like women are people too, in media, because we obviously had that with voting, but it didn't quite matriculate into the way the stories were told. And we have to face the consequence that the reason we're talking about this at all is that she is a female character. And that is like a part of the conversation that is sometimes difficult to think about, because it does sound antithetical, right? The term exists to define female character, a particular type of female character in text in the 60s, 70s, 80s. And because this character is female, the term gets raised whether or not the fact that she is female has anything to do with her character. Because frankly, like Star Wars, like particularly now, with the exception of Andor, doesn't really like gender or like code characters ethically. Everything I said there, the exception is Andor, because it's interested in those things. Rebels a little bit as well, a little bit. Some of it's a bit sketchy though, like the big the big dumb oaf on the ship is coded a particular type of way. Anyway, but yeah, like Andor is obviously a story thinking and in conversation with the politics of those things. But Star Wars in general, to be safe, has moved away from having those things impact the story and shape the characters. And so it's almost like the opposite of progressive, where they are so afraid to take risk and to put these characters in jeopardy because they don't want to piss off the people who go, it's an organization, no individual's thinking this. This is a systematic output of the organization and the needs of scale, which is they can't piss anyone off too much. And so they have to cast characters that reflect reality, which like in the UK, which is like all these accents, right? For the most part, in the UK, spoilers, it's kind of like very, very diverse, kind of very diverse everywhere. And so the casting reflects that and reflects the diversity of like what this imagined space universe is. But if the story isn't interested in thinking about those things and doing something with them, it can come across as you will get criticism from people like us for it being kind of tokenization in some ways, which is also a fraught term, I think, inherently. But it can come across as like, if you're gonna do it. Like, make a story that's thinking about these things. Make a story that is like interested in these things, or maybe let's like park the part of the discourse that is forcing frameworks on top of it that don't necessarily make, like, they're not meeting the story where it is. if you're going on Reddit and you're writing a list of like the reasons Rey is definitively a Mary Sue, you're not really meeting The Force Awakens where it is, which is like she is just a Luke Skywalker type, and she happens to be played by Daisy Ridley. And the implications for that we could talk about. Like, I think there's really interesting stuff there. I just don't know that. But this is ultimately what I wanted to get to. Is I don't know that people who are making that claim really understand why that term is raised in the first place, and understand why it would be interesting to have a conversation about that when it comes to a character like Rey. I think that they are potentially, and I'm speculating, but I've been doing this for a long time, I think they are potentially giving in to reactionary astonishment, and maybe there is a step back they need to take and go, hey, like, why is this a thing that I'm thinking and talking about in this way and in this context? Maybe it isn't anything to do with this character. Maybe it's to do with the fact that she's a female. And there's some interrogation I think a lot of those people could engage with, or could choose not to. But for our purposes, just to kind of circle back to Rye's point and kind of underscore it, the project that I have been doing for the last nearly 10 years now, with DCM Works, now with Zero Indent, with Undering Press, is this stuff is... Art is inherently political. All stories are political. And so thinking and talking about the ways in which the intersection of storytelling, art, politics, and then obviously like the psychoanalytical framework, discussing that stuff, I think, gives us better tools to understand media, helps us generate, synthesize new ideas and thoughts, and also like helps us hone our skills as storytellers, right? The reason that I was talking about this stuff, and I continually trick all of my friends into being on shows like this and to doing projects like this, is it helps keep the tools sharp, and it helps you inoculate yourself from the charlatans of the world who will tell you that the Star Wars fans will leave if this doesn't happen in the Mandalorian season finale. It helps inoculate you from the Reddit posts, which are saying there's going to be a final Sherlock episode. It helps inoculate you from the people who are telling you that Rey is a Mary Sue. It gives you tools to think about these things and dissect them, and prevents you from giving into that reactionary astonishment, which is like a really valuable tool set, I think, just in politics writ large, because it gives you the tool set to do the same thing in every part of your life, whether it's in your education system, if you're in high school or middle school, whether it's like, authority figures like parents giving you advice, whether it's friends giving you advice, whether it's bullshit that a politician is saying, right? Like these are like, these tools have such interoperability and extensibility that it seems foolish not to make the most of them. And we really like talking about Star Wars. And so it's a really good opportunity constantly to be able to do this and think about this stuff. And also, we're big fucking nerds. And so it's cool to be like, yeah, but how does the plumbing work on the Death Star? Like, that's fun to me to talk about. And I guess there is a joy in what we were talking about maybe before it even made it into this episode. But there is a joy to me in meeting these texts where they live, meeting them on their level, and then doing the work of processing and understanding them and thinking through, and not giving into that, like, not giving into the easiest possible reaction, which is formed by the easiest possible framework, which is usually the established framework, which if I haven't said this in as many words on this show, which I don't think I have because this is technically the second episode, not having a political opinion on something inherently means you're supporting the status quo, which is fine, but you must accept that, like, no position is a position.
You have said that before.
I have said that. I've said that before, probably everywhere, but I don't think I said it last time we did this. All to say, yes, we're not going to walk away from this in like 30 minutes with like, and here is why Rey is not a Mary Sue. We're going to land somewhere. But it's not going to be we're not going to have like a noun that we're going to associate with it. We might put her on like a 1 to 10 scale perhaps, but like I don't think that these things can exist in the dichotomies that, frankly, like we're often taught in our education systems, right? One of the first things you learn to use when it comes to something like biology is a dichotomous key. Humans have an instinct to want things to be black and white. It helps make patterns easier to identify, and we must resist giving into astonishment in that sense. Speaking of giving into astonishment, let's talk about Rey's fighting, because I think that's really the fighting and the Force thing, I think, kind of they can be separated, but I think they are in a lot of people's mind. Well, my argument about the ending of the story of this film is kind of related to the Force, and the story seems to think that too because of the way that it ends when Kylo's like, "I can teach you the ways of the Force," and then she's like, "The Force," and then she closes her eyes and we get the sting of the music. But the next kind of skill that we get exerted, which we'll talk about the Force after this, is she beats up a bunch of guys with a stick. She's good with the staff thing. It's frankly sick. I love to see Daisy Ridley beating people up. I would probably like just if they were like, here's a film of just like Rey beating guys up, I'd watch the shit out of it. It's very fun. This to me, I mean, my explanation of this quite straightforward. She lives on a desert planet by herself. She would need to learn self-defense. It seems necessary. She's kind of got like that scrappiness to her. I don't know. How do you guys feel about the fighting skills?
Was it you or Darth that watched my video in preparation for this?
I think we both did.
All right, it was Darth raised his hand there. So, I don't. This comes very early in her story, and it's not really that important. I mean, it's a little bit, it's a bit important to the scene or whatever, but it's not really that important. And the whole purpose of that being there is to give her credibility for the fight at the end of the movie. So she lives in a rough environment, and she carries a staff. I would put good money on she probably knows what to do with that thing. So it's not surprising. Like I every time that going back to when I first watched it in the theater, which I still remember pretty vividly, like, yeah, nothing jumped out at me about that.
Yeah, if the Wandering Knight carries a sword, you bet he knows how to use it. Like, yeah. It's pretty standard mythopoetic stuff.
The one argument I would make, that
here we go.
I would not stick too hard because this is definitely being overly analytical. But
that would never happen.
I know. I have spent a significant. I'm such a Star Wars nerd. I can't believe. Okay, I've spent a significant amount of time doing actual lightsaber battles with both a bow staff and with a single blade, and the skills are not transferable. I specialized in the bow staff because Darth Maul was my favorite character. That was my chosen weapon. I loved doing that. Like, this is what our nerd group of friends did. We choreographed lightsaber fights for fun. Yes, that
we've had very different lives.
I know.
I'm like, we just used to sit around, drink 40s, and smoke weed, and you're like, no, yeah, we actually choreographed. Jesus. Okay.
No,
yeah. Look, hey. No judgment. I
need
to my friends into doing podcasts. So
my cousin used to do staff exercises that he got from Xena Warrior Princess.
Rad.
That's hardcore.
I would be so much fitter if I had been into that when I was younger. Like, I feel like doing podcasts for 10 years now, and like all we would do is drink beer like every Thursday night and record that podcast. I feel like if I was training on bow staffs and shit, I would be far fitter and I would have far less back problems, I feel. So
anyway, the point of that being that from that life perspective that I had, I would look at that scene and I was like, this fight does not make sense. She knows how to swing like this. She doesn't know how to swing like this. Like, it is a different bit of muscle memory. But I could let that go because you have not had that experience and most of the audience has not had that experience. So I'm like, yes, they set it up where she has a bow staff, so that's her training and fighting and blah, blah, blah. The ending totally made sense with, the Force, I understand the Force, I'm going to go into the flow state and I could beat him, blah, blah, blah. What didn't work was that they, I think, should have had Kylo way more injured because he had the blaster bolt shot and then Finn nearly cut off his entire arm. So he's got two major injuries that don't hamper him whatsoever. And the fight went on too long before she goes into her flow state. So cut the fight down a lot where he's just like angrily swinging around. He could barely walk because he's so injured, but he still gets the best of her because she doesn't know what she's doing, both with the fighting and because he is a semi-trained Force user. Then she goes into her flow state after they've only been fighting for 30 seconds or something. All of that makes way more sense now and doesn't feel as Mary Sue-ish as most audience members think so, which I'd love your description because I agree. I think this is a scaled range, and what I keep coming back to is Kira from Solo, because she is a way better fighter than Rey is. But as far as I've seen, you don't see the Mary Sue label thrown at her like you see thrown at Rey. And I think it's because of the way that those skills were introduced, because in Solo, you see her, like, you see the explanation of, oh yeah, he's been training me to fight in Krav Maga for years. And you see that before her big epic battle with the boss dude at the end. So you know that this is coming, you know she has this skill set. It's introduced in a better way than Rey's skills are introduced. So it's not that people are upset about the Mary Sue, it's just the writing, and most of the audience is just not educated enough in the process of how do I evaluate this writing to know what the problem is, and so they just latch on to, oh, it's a Mary Sue problem, when it's not.
So the Kira thing, one of the tools for credibility, I've learned so much more about this, like, since I made that initial video about Rey being a credible pilot, etc. But what's going on there is there's a term for it, I forget, but it's just like instant credibility, where if you don't establish it beforehand, you need to stick it in the background, or you need to establish you establish immediate credibility by sticking it in the character's background and attaching it to something. So, you have was it L3 is the droid?
Yep.
So like Kara mops the floor with that guy, and L3's like, whoa, and that is a sort of a lampshade of acknowledging that, whoa, where the hell does this come from? And then she goes, oh, this character who I've been with for, or who has been in my background for X amount of time has been showing me how to do this. And you go, okay, you've immediately established the credibility for her having done the thing. And we didn't establish it. We didn't know she could do it beforehand, but you establish it now.
If you don't remember the scene that literally happens in the background, like Han or whoever is looking through the window, and behind him in the background you see her beating up the guard, and then after that you get the explanation of, oh, in my background I've learned how to fight.
Yeah. Now Rey, on the other hand, this is there's a couple of, to land her, I will give you the credibility problems or issues here, and you can tell me where you think this lands on the Sue scale. Is that she has an opportunity when they first get into the Millennium Falcon to establish that immediate background credibility. There we go. Dave's got the right idea. I'm on. I refilled my drink while you were going on your long tirade there.
Pirate, okay. I was going to say rant.
It's the wrong word. It was a
monologue.
There you go. It wasn't a tirade. It wasn't a rant either. But anyway, so she has the opportunity before she takes off to give herself the immediate background credibility, where he goes, "Have you ever flown this thing before?" And she goes, "No, this thing hasn't flown in years." So like that opportunity missed. And then, as far as like her being like a really good pilot, it's important to note that when she first takes off, she's like crashing like all over the place. But then she like quickly recovers and then does some of the most insane flying that we'd seen up to that point in Star Wars. Mostly probably because of special effects, but still some really insane flying. Now, the next opportunity is they get up into space, and her and Finn and BB-8 rejoin, and they're like, "Whoa, that was crazy!" Then, like, how did you do that? And she goes, "I don't know." She's like, I've like, she does a little bit of background credibility here, and goes like, "Well, I've flown some stuff before, but never off planet."
There's another bit of dialogue that's really interesting, though, is when she is getting ready to take off and when he's strapping into the gunner's seat, it cuts back and forth between them, and they're saying, I can do this, I can do this. And then cuts to him, and he's saying, I can do this, I can do. So why does she already know she could pilot the ship? Is that what the line is supposed to be, giving her the credibility?
No. Yeah, that's psyching. Well, first of all, that is psyching themselves up. But Finn has already done this, as you said earlier, with Poe. It's like, not only can I do this, I just did this like a minute ago.
It is okay. Granted, it's cute. Like, it's a cute moment. I think it's good character.
Well, no, it's important that you work
at the expense of characterization.
But it's important that you bring up that little moment there, because that, I think I said that in the video. Like, the whole point of this sequence is about, and not about her being a pilot. That's because her being a pilot is not relevant to her story at all past this moment, where it is like extremely relevant to Luke.
She doesn't fly again until she gets in Luke's X-wing
to Exegol. Yeah, and that's not, and it's not really critical because all she has to do is just get there. So like, whereas Luke, it's the pivotal element of his character in A New Hope is that he's a pilot, right?
Yeah.
So this moment is not about establishing her as a pilot. This moment is about like her and Finn growing a bond together, because at the finale, or the climax of the scene, is her killing the power and flipping over so that he can shoot the gun and kill the TIE fighter that's chasing them. And that is cementing, cementing their bond, etc. Yes. Yeah. So if you look at it that way, it's a very cool scene, but that's overshadowed by the fact of she's not really credible in that moment. And they gave her this like I wouldn't go as, well, I mean, I might go as far as to say hyper competency, but like very good flying skill.
It's crazy, dude. Like, it's nuts.
But it's kind of an ass pull, and it's really only relevant to now, and that's it.
I think one of my issues, this is going to be a stupid sentence, but bear with me. One of my issues with the sequel trilogy is how much it's interested in Star Wars. I know. Let me explain. Luke, the reason that Luke has an X-Wing and is a good pilot is it allows him to be in the mythopoetic structure, which is the original Star Wars trilogy. It allows him to be the knight errant, or like the Ronin. It's based on that kind of samurai style. And it allows him to do things like leave the main crew and go off to Yoda and train. And it allows him to do things like he becomes the wandering knight errant. And one of the instincts that this trilogy has is everything has to be a Star Wars reference. And so Rey ends up taking ownership of the Falcon, which has the accidental consequence of robbing this story of some of its potentiality, because the Falcon needs a co-pilot. And so Chewie must be there. And so the space that they're playing in when it comes to the levers they can pull for these characters, in my opinion, is severely limited by like how referential some of this stuff ends up being. If it had not been the Falcon, it had been think about Mando's dope, his original Razor Crest, which is one of my favorite gags in that show that just constantly gets ruined. And then he builds his new cool Naboo starfighter, hybrid thing. And it lets him be the knight errant with Grogu. There are levers they could pull here that would help this be related to her story if they wanted to have her be the one that's flying. But also, like, candidly, it feels odd that you introduce Poe Dameron as the best pilot we've ever fucking seen in our goddamn lives, and then immediately Rey is also the best pilot we've seen. It's odd. Like, it's an odd choice to me, to give her that skill. And it feels like they gave her that skill because they wanted her to fly the Falcon. Like, that's candidly, like, if I had to finger in the air of like what's going on here, because the Falcon's a Star Wars thing, and that gives them the connection to Han. Like, the fact that she gets involved in the story at all is a coincidence. It's because they happen to steal that ship, right? She happens to find BB-8. BB-8 happens to run into her, right?
Yeah, you just clued into one of the other big issues of the of the sequel trilogy, and especially the Force Awakens, is that there is the original, a coincidence can begin a story. But after that, we should have a logical progression from A to B to C, etc., and not just be and then this happened.
Yeah, it should be this happened, then this happened because of this. Like it's Sean Coyne, he calls it active versus passive turning points. So his thing is you can have one passive turning point in a story. You can have one thing that's a coincidence, and after that, everything doesn't have to be at the start, but everything else has to be active. The second you have too many passive, it feels contrived.
Well, the only exception to that, well, it might not be as far as number, but the only exception to that I've heard is that anytime that you have a coincidence, it should be a negative. It should be a complication. It should make, because it's the Pixar rule is that a coincidence that leads to complications is interesting. A coincidence to get out of complications is cheating.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, like the obvious example is, I'm trying to think of one that isn't.
It's you're trying to think of one that isn't from The Last Jedi?
Yeah.
The quintessential one to me is the hacker in The Last Jedi. Them running into him. Him being the exact person that they're looking for that can solve the problem that they're in.
Yeah, it's absurd. An example of where this works, I think, an example of where this works is, say, like in early Styx Lord of the Rings, where I'm talking about the films because the books are a little bit different, where Frodo and Sam ran into Merry and Pippin, and like that immediately short term is a problem, and then long term, becomes like part of the story, but immediately is an issue for them because they have to conceal this quest that they're on, and then the writer turns up and they almost get them caught, and then they're the ones that cook the bacon. Like that coincidence is bad. Until these characters learn to mature and play for Team Good. The other way that you can do this establishment of skills is like you just open with the character doing them. You think about Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan in that first story they're in. And the first thing they're doing is like they're doing this diplomatic thing. They escape an assassination attempt and they just like they fuck up some droids like instantly. And you never again in that story question, can these guys fight? Because it's established, and you also, one of the other ways that you can do it is you have it's a mechanism that can vary in its success, but one of the things that is difficult about characters is if they tell you what they're good at, it can feel weird. But if other characters are talking about it organically, that can lend them credibility.
Third-party validation, yeah.
Third-party validation. You don't need someone to say, Jedi Knights are like this, that, and you don't have the Jedi in that first. Well, you do later, but the way that you're introduced to them isn't Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon being like, and here, man, if only we weren't sitting in this boring meeting room, I could bust out my lightsaber and do some Force powers. You get the ways you see them do it. You get other characters talking about them. The way that people they have a reverence when they're talking about Jedi Knights. Anakin's like, you're a Jedi Knight, aren't you? And they're these mystical warrior figures, the monk order. And third-party validation is a really easy way to do it. Rey's biggest problem is that she's alone, so there's no third party to validate it in a positive way, and they miss a trick, I feel, in not adding negative validation. What I mean by that is if she's a really good fighter, maybe we get a sequence where when someone the boss says, hey, go and get her, and someone's like, boss, I don't want to do that, she's going to beat the crap out of us, and he's like, I gave you a fucking order, go. Like that's going to give you that validation that she's good at fighting. Or you get the third party validation from Kylo Ren for her Force abilities, where he says to
she's strong with the Force. He does validate that,
yeah. Which I think brings us nicely, because we are running out of time, but that does bring us nicely, I think, to the conclusion of the story. So we go through all this bullshit, we're doing another Death Star, and we get, by the way, Poe Dameron, fucking absolute MVP of this whole sequence, completely crushed it. But we get the final sword fight where Finn gets absolutely, almost instantly nuked by Kylo Ren. It's very fun to me. And then Rey, the sequence is Kylo is trying to grab the sword out of the snow with the Force, and he goes to, and then she pulls it past him with the Force and catches it. And she ignites the saber, and it looks sick as shit. She ignites the saber, and then they have this fight in the snow, and she's immediately on the ropes. He's like he's just pushing. He's basically like toying with her to an extent, like he's pushing her back, but he's clearly hurt. He's bleeding because he got hit by the dog of the group. He's big bowcaster thing. There I go again, insulting the Wookiees. But he gets hit by they're not real, okay? It's not a real person. He's injured, and he's sort of like amping himself up with his rage and things like that. Gets her on the ropes, and they get into a sword lock, and he says, "Hey, you need someone to teach you in the ways of the Force. I can teach you." And she hears that. She goes, "The Force," because Maz Kanata was explaining to her just after she touched the sword, which is she has the same Force echo power that Cal Kestis from the video games does. She touches the sword, has the vision. And Maz explains, "Hey, this is the Force that connects us, it surrounds us, it binds us, etc." She remembers that, and she closes her eyes and feels it, and then she comes out swinging, and she kind of knocks him back, and then defeats him pretty quickly. And then obviously we have the third party intervention of the Falcon arriving, and everything goes from there. But people's biggest complaint with this moment is, how could she beat Ben Solo, this kid with like full Jedi training, etc., etc. Now, obviously, like, if we want to be literal about it, which let's just do that very quickly because otherwise we'll get a comment. Kylo Ren is injured. He's just been shot. He just killed his dad, so he's not in a good mental headspace. He's way too aggressive. Like, he's just doing these big baseball bat swings. And also, like, he's never fought her before. So, as I'm sure Darth will tell you, as a person who's done real life sword fighting, one of the biggest threats to someone engaging in melee like that is if you don't know the other fighter.
Or if you're fighting an amateur.
And fighting an amateur, because they'll do stuff you're not expecting, which is incredibly dangerous. That's why you have bracketing in sports, right? Particularly in physical encounters. That's why you have different tiers and weights and things like that. Is there anything you want to add to that from a technical perspective, Darth?
He also doesn't want to kill her.
Yes. He wants to turn her.
He really goes back and forth on that. The whole trilogy, though.
We talked about that. That's one of my favorite bits that we talked about on the last part, where it's like, yeah, he completely forgets that he's there to recruit her at the Death Star in Tross. But no, it's the same situation here. Is that the excuse for, like, you're absolutely right, and a lot of people forget that she's losing until he like pushes her to the literal edge. And then she taps into the cheat codes.
I also think,
he's not trying to kill her up to that point. Not really.
I think a big issue with the scene is also just straight up, it's the choreography, and they should have done the choreography different, because the way that they shot it, it almost looks like she physically overpowers him, and that's why she won. Because at one point they're grappling, physically grappling, and she's pushing his saber into the ground here, and he's pushing her saber into the ground here, and it's like, there's no way, no matter how hurt he is, there's no way this little 90-pound girl should be able to physically grapple with someone who's 6 foot whatever and has been a fighter for however long. And I think, just like I said, I think with the way that they choreographed it, it naturally ties into the Mary Sue argument, versus just having her go into this flow state and she is attacking him so fast he can't even see this is how the books described lightsaber fighting so much, is that it is a blur of light. You can't see where the blows are coming from because they're coming so fast. If they had done something like that and made it way more obvious that it is the Force who is guiding her blade, even just shut her eyes, like she does it blindfolded basically. There are so many ways they could have made it obvious she is not physically overpowering him, which is more how it came off, especially with she does this like big swing and then she comes down and she's all like, I'm big and bad, this kind of, she's got all this adrenaline going, and it looks way more aggressive than the calm Force letting her win would have made this.
Important to note, as far as like when in regards to the choreography, is that the way that it was shot, and I tried to convey this in my credibility part 2, I don't think I did well enough, because when I showed it to my Star Wars buddy, I had to clue him into this. I tried to put the recording in, and maybe I should have verbalized it, but I might not have even noticed it until I was editing. But shot for shot, it is almost exactly the same as Anakin versus Dooku.
Oh,
and
I was gonna say it's there's so much Palpatine in there as well. So many of the stances.
So, this is I will fault Ryan for this, or Ryan, or however you whatever you want to call it.
Ryan Johnson, that's what he's trying to say.
Johnson. Yeah, this Jen's getting
Ruin.
Ruin. Well, that's the nickname for him. Ruin
Oh,
Johnson. Oh wait, is he gonna leave the room?
Oh, I hate it. Oh, that's so bad. Star Wars fans suck so bad. That sucks.
Yeah. All right.
You're
Anyways.
clowns. You're some kids, man. Shit.
So it was probably one of the bigger missed opportunities of the sequel trilogy, is to not really lean into that, because again, this is in the script, is that she's not really tapping into the kind of the Force that she really should be. She's going to the dark side here, and she's going to kill him. She wants to kill him. And then that choice is removed from her by the ground splitting.
I'd always kind of thought that, yeah.
That's in the script. They don't really convey that well enough in the movie. And then Ryan doesn't pick up on that at all when they go into the Last Jedi. Because like that should have been like a big question for her with Luke, like, yo, I did this thing, and I did the thing that the lady told me to do. And it was awesome, first of all, but I wanted to kill this guy.
Dude, imagine her eyes glowing with like the Sith yellow, like in that moment.
Yeah. Okay, hang on. It's not Sith yellow, it's dark side yellow, because you can be a dark side user and not be a Sith. And you would know that if you weren't a fake Star Wars fan.
I know.
Truth.
Check.
So dunked on. And
boom.
Yeah, so no, but so I think in my other video I said like her summoning the power to beat Kylo when she's at the edge of the cliff is the first time that she uses the Force in the movie, and this is the third time that she's used the Force in the movie. The first time that she's used the Force in the movie where it is credible, because much like Obi-Wan telling Luke, you need to do this, or like, this is how you do this thing, and it's important that I tell you how to do this thing, because this is what you're going to have to do at the climax of the movie.
This will be important.
Yeah, and so Maz tells her exactly what she needs to do at the climax, and then at the climax of the movie she does it. However, this is the third time she's used the Force, and she did the ass pull with the mind trick, and then she did it again. And then she did it again.
Mind trick to get out.
And then she does. The second one is she summons the lightsaber to herself, and then
yes.
And then we go to I said it in the video where she's like when Kylo's like, I could show you the ways of the Force, and she's like holding the lightsaber, and she's like, the Force, that thing I just did like 2 seconds ago. Oh yeah, let me try that. And I don't know, it misses the mark for me because of those two previous instances. It's like, oh, it's because in Luke's arc, if you want to call it that, is really shallow in that it's all he has to do is choose between technology and the Force and accept the Force. That's essentially it. And once he accepts the Force, then that allows him to win the movie. And it's the same is true with Rey. Once she accepts the Force, that allows her to win the movie. But she's already done that twice before then. So, I mean, do you get where I'm coming from on this?
Yeah, I do. I mean,
structurally, it's a big problem for me.
Yes. The other kind of lever I think that it's missing. I mean, you guys have really like articulated the shape of why this doesn't work really, really well. The other lever it's missing is this choice, the way that she resolves this conflict doesn't have anything to do with what happened before. Like you guys were saying at the start, where she started on Jakku, wanting this, that, and the fifth thing, for her parents to come back and needing to accept that she has to go out and find her family. Like, I mean, found family, not literally go and find her parents. She has to accept that that's what she really needs. But actually, what she really needs is to believe in the Force. Those aren't like related to each other. In a way, they're not related to each other in the same way that in the original Star Wars, you have the figure of Darth Vader, who is the stand-in. And by the way, let's just compartmentalize the like weird ableist like shit that goes on with Star Wars and mechanics and stuff and the ways in which it views disability. Let's park that for now. But Darth Vader is a stand-in for the dark side, which is like inherently like the Imperials are coded, like it's metal, it's like gunmetal, it's facelessness, it's inorganic shit. The good guys, the rebels, it's the organics, it's nature, it's the Force, right? Luke has to accept the underlying power that is inherent, that will allow the good guys to beat the big bad evil mechanical guys, right? Like to defeat the industry and bring back balance, or whatever the fuck you want to call it. Rey's choice here doesn't have much to do with the character that they have built, her backstory, her wants and her needs, or even her lie, really. Because this is the moment, ironically, this is the moment where my rewrite would have him taunt her about her parents, like we see in the next film. That's where I would do it here, and then I would have her try and kill him in response. And then she's got the sword and she's about to do him in, and then, Finn is like, hey, don't kill him, that's, that'll make you like one of them. And then suddenly you have a compelling arc for her, which is like, she has to listen to her found family and accept who she is and not murder this guy for throwing her lost family in her face. A bunch of ways you could fix this, but yeah, fundamentally, it's lack of relationship to the character they've constructed and her wants and needs. It's lack of credibility, or not even that, it's just like a lack of believability of the sequencing. And as Darth said, that's in part the choreography, it's in part the thematic piece, it's in part the structure of the scene as well. For my money, it's the resolution to the scene also, as in the way that they get separated. And then it's also, as we said, the dialogue. Like, I think fundamentally there's a lot of things about this which aren't pulling in the directions it should. The other thing is, in the original story, Luke doesn't do sword fighting in that film to resolve the conflict. He's flying his ship. Here, the thing that we've seen Rey be really good at, which is flying the Falcon, isn't what she's doing to resolve the story. Luke has to go away and get sword training and force training before he can come back in that final picture and be a really good Jedi. Like he comes back in the second one, gets literally disarmed, which is still my favorite joke. And then he comes back, and then he's able to overcome his father and the Emperor. And I think a lot of people's criticism that Rey is just like inherently good at this stuff, I think is like, particularly when it comes to the Force, it's a bit silly. It's magic. Like, you can just be good at magic. There are like people that are just good at magic. I think the problem is the ways in which, I mean, come on, you've seen fucking Harry Potter. You can just be good at shit. Like, you can just be the chosen one. The problem is the way in which, in the story itself, the credibility is established, and the ways in which the story is resolved with credibility that is unrelated to the character development they've been doing. And I think for me, when we talk about like why she might feel a bit like a Mary Sue, those are the levers I'm pulling on in my discussions. Those are the things that I bring to the party and bring to the table. Because, I mean, yeah, the granted, Star Wars is far more sci-fi than it's ever been. Me and Darth talked about that a lot in Sherlock. I know I talk about that a lot with you guys. It's more sci-fi than it's ever been. It's far less fantasy. But there is still the mythopoetic thing happening of like, it's still fucking magic. And it's still guys with magic powers fighting with swords. And you can just have a moment of being good with the magic and then go and get more training. I have no problem with that. But I completely agree. I think the sequencing, the framing, and the kind of thematic structure around this, and then the narrative structure as well, just do a disservice to like what the scene is trying to achieve. There are so many ways you could do this. Like you guys said, you go full dark-sided. She's trying to murder him. You could have her do the like do something similar to what Obi-Wan does. Take a leap of faith. The way that he kills or doesn't kill Darth Maul, spoilers. You could do that, or you could do the kind of like the Last Jedi approach of like she's avoiding all of, you know, he's getting too aggressive, she's avoiding his blows, and she, you know, does them in one kind of thing, which is, you know, what you could do if you wanted to go that direction. There are so many levers you could pull, but they don't pull in any particular lever too hard, because pulling in any particular lever too hard goes back to what we were talking about before. It risks taking a stance and saying something and having an opinion about this. Like, this film doesn't have an opinion about the Force. It doesn't have an opinion about Kylo Ren. It doesn't have an opinion about Rey's place in this mythopoetic arch narrative that's happening. It ultimately, in not making a choice, it fails to say anything. And like we always say, if you fail to say anything, you support the status quo, which is inherently political. And I think it's a shame that they don't make a choice with this moment. They don't make this moment about her in some compelling and meaningful way. Instead, it just is a Star Wars scene. It's the best way I can think of describing what's happening here. It has all of the requisite elements of what we expect from a Star Wars sword fight, but it doesn't have a raison d'etre. There's no reason for this to happen for these characters in this moment. With the notable exception of Kylo Ren, who has obviously just killed his dad and he's a fucking mess, and he's trying to find anyone to take his emotions out on. But that doesn't really relate to like what Rey's going through and the positioning that these two characters have in this story.
And you know whose fault that is? Rian Johnson. Because
we got him, ladies and gentlemen.
because the problem with Rey, writ large, is the original premise. This scene is the best example of the original premise that you had for this discussion, which is the lack of consequence, or the conflict, or the negativity, or however you put it at the beginning of all this is. And I think I had said that in our. When I think about her, I always think about what Dumbledore says to Harry Potter in the last movie: is it's time to make a choice between what is right and what is easy.
Yeah.
So what is right is like so. And if you think of that, is a great way to think about how the Force is used in this particular area. Is that what is right is, you know, the light side of the Force is the right way to do things, and that is not easy. It's the whole idea, or I don't know if dichotomy is the right word, but the whole thing with the Force is that the easy way is the dark side, and that's the wrong way to go. And the hard thing to do, the thing that takes much longer, is to use the Force, the light side of the Force. Or actually, this is something that I've been corrected on recently. There is no light side of the Force. It's just the Force. You have the Force and you have the dark side.
It's a spectrum, like we were talking about, right?
So for Rey, she's missing that conflict of, and it's more than any other character, more than Anakin and more than Luke. She should be somebody who is just complete, like her complete setup is to go dark side, because she has an awful background, and to suddenly have all this power be available to her, and you see it in every movie, I'm pretty sure, is that she just goes nuts and is unable to control herself. And yeah, that does happen in every movie, and that happens, but then there's no like introspective moment of like, oh shit, like I went pretty dark there. Like that doesn't happen. There's no consequence for her. She's just Miss Goody Two Shoes, or
they triple down on that later, where like she does the Force lightning and it's a fake out because it's the wrong transport. Like they're just so afraid of putting these characters in any kind of like moral jeopardy, which is like such a shame. I don't know. It just.
Well, I like I said, the reason I blame Ryan for this is because it's like I said, it's there in the script that this setup for she wins, but like she went dark there. That's the way that scene shot, and that's the way that script is originally written, and that's not picked up. That is completely left to the wayside in Last Jedi.
Yeah. Okay, we need to wrap up because I do need to go. Look, any very quick closing thoughts I will read very quickly before that. I wrote down a bullet point of stuff I liked in the film. So we'll end on that as like a positive note. But do you guys have any closing thoughts on that?
I will go first because mine's very brief. Is that I don't think Rey is a Mary Sue. I think she rates very highly on the Mary Sue scale. I don't think she is a complete Mary Sue, and I also think that she's definitely a more complex character than Luke is in A New Hope, and then probably as well as Anakin in The Phantom Menace. I think she is a more complex character than those two. I don't think the rest of the trilogy takes advantage of that initial complexity, or at least, or maybe this movie doesn't either. But she is, I think because she does have that want, lie, need, and ghost at the beginning of the movie. Yeah. So that's where I'm going to leave that.
Darth, anything you want to add?
No, I'd echo all that, and I think that she is actually my favorite character in this trilogy from the perspective of looking at the wasted potential that was there, because there is so much that I adore about having this, this sheltered, isolated, hurt being grow up, and whether she goes towards the dark or towards the light, either way could have been a really compelling story. And I love the way that everything was broken down with the Mary Sue scale and all. And yes, we want everything to be black and white, especially me. But
the most literal man on the planet. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I agree with all of that. I mean, I think my monologue in the middle pretty much clarifies my position on a lot of this. Go and watch Andor. It's a story that thinks about other stuff and pulls those levers and does things with them and has characters talk about them to each other, and is just everything that Star Wars has needed to be for a long time.
And the Force isn't there at all.
The Force isn't... Oh, it's good. So good. Okay. Let's very quickly... God, I could talk about that show for...
And we will.
Anyway, we will. I wrote a quick list of stuff I liked in this film, so I'm going to rattle that off, and then we'll do pluggables, and then we'll wrap it up. I already said this, but Han immediately knowing... Huh?
I'm going to give you a yes/no, and if I agree.
Okay. Han immediately knowing Finn isn't with the Resistance and giving him that, like, come on look is very funny to me.
Yes.
Rey says, I didn't realize there was this much green in the whole galaxy. Is some Luke Skywalker-ass shit, if ever I've heard.
Beautiful moment.
Yep, very good.
Well, also, what makes that moment even more beautiful is the look that Han gives her when she sasays that.
The pity. Yeah.
It's so good. And then he offers her a job, and I'm like, big dad vibes. Maz's bar is awesome, but her...
Yeah, go do that instead of the rest of the movie. Go work with Han.
100%. Go do smuggling adventures. Maz's bar is awesome, but her design makes me want to put my head through a wall. I think I already said that. And the sequence where Rey goes and finds Luke's sword is still incredible. Always makes you go, damn, would have been cool to see the Knights of Ren.
It's a good question for another time.
Good question for another time. Darth, where can people find you on the internet?
You could go to the YouTubes and search for DARTH''D. And what I have right now, I've got a 14-page script on digital commerce that I'm just finishing up, which is awesome and has nothing to do with Star Wars whatsoever, which feels like a lovely break. And then another script on the monsters of Star Wars, where I'm looking at all like the huge beasties and stuff, which is just so much fun to be going through. And then a third one that's in editing right now, which ironically I utterly forget the topic of. Oh, humanizing the villain. That one is all about how like the Tusken Raiders have been like reformed so that they're no longer just mindless savages, and Kylo Ren was humanized, and all these different characters have been humanized. But like, why? Why is that such a big topic in Star Wars? It all started with Darth Vader, but why did it keep going? Those, yeah,
sounds fascinating. Brian, what you got going on? Got anything going on?
You can find me at RYEBOLD on the YouTubes. I haven't done anything in a long time. I should be doing something soon, but
instead we're doing this.
Yeah, instead we're doing this, and most recently you can find me struggling to articulate a thought in Darth videos.
Yeah,
on his channel.
Love it. Get into it. You obviously can find everything we do at zeroindent.com. If you want to get merch, under ink.press, there will be a t-shirt of some description for this show. We're doing like a piece of merch for every show that we do. I'm going to check that out. And when you hear this, our Daredevil show will be out. The first episode dropped a week ago, where me and Patrick are rewatching all of Daredevil and talking about its philosophy. I'm so proud of how that show turned out. If you like the way that we talk about stuff here, it's a show where we do it, but about a thing that's good, which is even better. It's like the anti-Sherlock show, where we're just happy to be there every week.
And if you only care about Star Wars, go listen to us talk about Kylo Ren for 2 hours, and then go listen to Daredevil.
Go listen to the previous ep. Yeah, it's a really interesting chat. And then you can also go find our full season 3 breakdown of The Mandalorian each episode. I think over on Darth's channel. That'll be somewhere in the live tab, I reckon.
Yep.
So go do that. But we got to get out of here because I got to go to lunch. Thank you for watching or listening. Wherever you consume it, do consider giving us a rating or review or an engagement. You know how these platforms work. Helps more people find the show. And I would love to know in the chat where you land. Like, what do you think about Rey? Where do you land on, like, sort of her on the Mary Sue scale? How much, merit do you put into those kinds of arguments? And is there something in Star Wars you'd like to hear us talk about? Because we're always open to suggestion if there's topics you want us to cover. We obviously have a billion ideas that we want to talk about, but Star Wars or otherwise, let us know in the comments if there's stuff you want us to talk about. Otherwise, we will catch you guys next time. Is there like a Star Wars outro that we do?
Well, we're also happy to talk about particularly good or particularly bad movies of any kind.
That's true. Yeah, and also Andor.
You can usually find us doing that for at least 20 or 30 minutes on one of the live sessions on Darth's channel.
Yeah, Dead Man's Chest is next, right?
Yeah.
Holy shit, we have to talk about this first. What's like a Star Wars outro that we could do? What's the thing that Star Wars people say?
Don't do drugs. The Batman is awesome, and may the force be with you always.
Forgot about don't do drugs.
All right, we'll catch you guys in the next one.
Bye.